Hello everyone, welcome to the Zero Waste Design Activity for Redress 2024. My name is Danielle Elsener and I have been a zero waste systems designer for over the last decade working in design, education, and research in the field of zero waste design. And today I'm going to be working with you to think about how to think as a zero waste designer. This activity has been newly developed for this program, so I'm really excited to get into it with you. And I'm going to just be talking along as I show you some illustrations, and I'm going to be going back and forth between this presentation and Clo3D. So the question I often get asked as a zero waste designer is, how do you start creating a zero waste design from a basic pattern? There are generally 4 different ways of designing a zero waste garment, or 4 different methods, from drape, geometric cut, designing backwards from a pattern, and tessellation. And my kind of specialty within that is in the space of designing backwards from a basic pattern. So I'm going to be showing you this demo in digital format. This can be done either in Clo3D or in paper. It can be fun in either one. With Clo, you get a little bit more of a 3D understanding of this activity. But you can also go ahead and print out a pattern or use any pattern that you have at your disposal. For this exercise, I'm simply using a pattern provided for free via Closet from Clo3D. So I decided to design using a very basic women's tight pattern. So for this activity, please get together whatever garment you want to be working on. Just keep it as simple as possible, not a lot of extra details. But for this, we're just going to be using this tight as our starting point. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to create an X and Y axis going through the very center of our main panel. For this tight, we have a couple of pieces. We have a left and right leg, a gusset, and a waistband. I'm just going to pick the most important piece and go from there. If you're doing a button-down shirt, let's say, maybe you pick the front panel to start doing this, or you can join the front and back panel and start from there. Or you can also do this with something like a sleeve. So what we're going to be doing is basically be creating a repeat pattern. If anyone's taken any illustration courses in school or outside of school, you often get taught how to make a repeat pattern. And this is somewhat the way that you go about learning that from a graphic standpoint, but we're going to be doing it from a cut and sew pattern standpoint. So go ahead and either draw on your paper or in Clo, create a X and Y axis where it's going to cross right through the center of that pattern. I also have this little dialog box up here in the right just to give a reference of where we're starting. So as we're going through and making changes, we can just remember where we're starting from. Once you've made that X and Y axis, you're going to cut those apart into 4 pieces. Now, this is a blank pattern I'm showing you. It can be really helpful to use a directional pattern. I've drawn little squiggles on my paper pattern before, so I can remember which way is up, which is down, and which way the directional print goes. So feel free to do that as well. The next thing you're going to be doing is rotating each of these 4 pattern pieces 180 degrees. So you're basically taking that center, the 4 corners you cut in the center and rotating them out to be the outside of this box. The next thing you're going to do is take the right side pieces and you're going to flip them on the x-axis so that you have a larger piece on the top left and bottom right and a smaller piece in the bottom left and top right. We're doing that to basically be able to shift the volume and make sure that it kind of nests together a little bit better. I've just discovered this through practice. If that doesn't make sense for your pattern piece, feel free to skip this step. And of course, as we're going along, feel free to pause the video and take some time to do the steps as suggested, and then you can always come back. Moving right along, the next thing you're going to do is move these pattern pieces closer together, both on the X and Y axis. You're going to be shifting them closer together until the inside edges touch. So right here, I have this edge touching, I have this edge touching. And what I'm doing is I'm not moving all of these in as close as I can, and I'm doing that because I want to maintain an exterior rectangle. You can see that if I move this pattern piece in even further to the on the X or Y axis, it would kind of break this rectangle that we have forming here. Now that we have that rectangle, we're going to shift things a little bit further. What we're going to do is start overlapping. And what we are doing here is we're moving these pieces over until the majority of the space is full. So here, I'm going to go back and forth. You can see that this little gap here, this is what I'm filling when I am moving it over. So I'm overlapping these pieces on the x-axis as I move forward. And you can see these yellow bits are highlighted. This is what the overlap is creating. This is one layer after it has gotten shifted together, one layer on top of another layer. And we're going to do that for both the x and y axis. So now you can see there is still a little bit of space here in the middle, and that's okay. We're going to be using those spaces, but the reason why we are doing this kind of exercising of squishing things together is to start looking at the positive and negative space, where we can shift things, and how we can kind of shift the pattern as it is, just in its basic form, to kind of try to eliminate these overlap spaces. So as I just mentioned, it's a good idea to highlight these pieces that there is no overlap and there is no pattern. These are the negative spaces that you've created, and we're going to think about what kind of shapes they are. We're going to get into this a little bit more later, but make sure you highlight those so that we know what that space is that we're working with. Now we're going to start thinking in 3D. So I'm going to go back and forth between 3D here so that we can visualize what is happening. Basically, remember that this is our starting point. We have just one main seam in the front and an inseam, the front and back rise and an inseam. And what I've done here is I basically cut and separated all of these yellow overlap bits so we can visualize where these overlaps are on the pattern. You can see that this larger, like, kind of skewed rectangle is up here on the waist. This one here is on the front waist. Excuse me. And then these kind of oddly shaped shapes, you can see them reappearing here in the inseam going into the rise, and then on the calf as well. And now the reason why I'm visualizing this way is because we are going to eventually make a decision. We can either cut it out of the leg panel, or we can cut it out of the gusset panel. We can make a decision of which of these design lines we like more, and we can go from there when we're making our design decisions. But you can see here, this is the X that we've made, these seam lines, this X seam and this Y seam. That is basically this exterior box that we've created. And we're going to address this a little later. We don't want all of these seams in here necessarily. It's just for us to start thinking outside of the box. Now, as I started mentioning, we are going to start making decisions. And if this, then that kind of scenario. So from this example here, I'm going to click back and forth between these. Right now, this pattern piece is the bottom half of a leg. And this pattern piece is also the bottom half of the leg. It's the front and back. And right now, if I just were to cut this off, it would basically remove the overlap. So there's no more overlap in this area. And you can see that the bottom panels are now angled. And it creates a slight angle to the hem of the tight. Will that negate anything about the tight? Will it break it? Will it make it not a tight anymore if we make a slightly angled hem? Will it change the inseam and outseam length? These are all things that we can start thinking about. But basically, if I cut this off on the bottom of the pant, or on the bottom of the tights, we no longer have this overlap up here at the waist like we did in our original example. So now this overlap has been eliminated, these ones here. And now we've kind of solved that bit of the pattern, the overlaps in the middle. We've removed that overlap, so now we can proceed to the next overlap and decide what we want to do there. Again, with all of these things, there is no right answer. I'm just trying to talk you through how I go about thinking about these things, the if this, then that, kind of dissecting and critically thinking about how your garment changes as you are making design decisions. I find this very fun. So now we have the next bit. These overlaps that we have here, these yellow ones, this is basically creating an overlap again at the front and back inseam to rise area, or it's creating an overlap here in the calf. And my query is, like, basically most tights have some sort of gusset in the rise area. And there is this little piece. I do want to make a note to remember that we do have these other pattern pieces. I ignored them while making this X and Y axis and starting the design process. But this is kind of where I also start bringing them back in. Because right now, we already have a gusset piece that we're going to have to add back in. So would it be the end of the world if we cut off these pieces and tried to cut and sew them, or try to alter them a little bit to create a differently shaped gusset, which would give the same volume and fit that we had before, and it would eliminate that overlap. So now the calf area, the overlap has been eliminated, and now it's just a more standard calf area again. So again, you have to start thinking about, will it affect your fit? Will it affect your design decisions? If you do cut this off and make it as a separate pattern piece, it will add a seam line here, and it looks like it's coming up to a point right in the front rise. I don't know if we really want that, because it might not look the most flattering on a female body. So again, very, very useful to have this in 3D so you can visualize as you're going. So now I've taken these extra pieces that I cut off, and I am laying them into this extra space that I have created. Because remember, these these pink bits are negative space that would be waste. If we cut and sewed this pattern right now, these would be waste pieces. But you can see that there are kind of similar volumes in the pieces that we've cut off, these yellow bits. I think if we rotated them around and played with them and kind of tried fitting that positive space into the negative space, I think that we can find a solution where we can use that pink negative space to create the pattern pieces that we need for the yellow pattern pieces. So just play around. This is where it's helpful to have things in paper, because you can just kind of shift and move things around. And you'll see that I'm also reintegrating in this gusset pattern piece, because I haven't really thought of a solution for this pattern piece yet. Because it's nearly a rectangle, it would be very easy to just cut a ton along a strip of fabric. But if you can integrate it into the pattern piece, that's always helpful, and it can help you use up negative space. So, as I said before, I did not like how high up this line went. If I had just cut off that overlap piece as is, it would create a little point up here. And so what I wanted to do was I wanted to basically shift that seam line. So right now, if you can see, this line right here is the center front of the garment, which is right here. So what I did is I decided to shift the line that I basically shifted the inseam line for the tight. I shifted this just over, and that's this pink line you can see here. And then you have to remember that if you make one design choice, you have to do an equal and opposite design choice. So if I shifted this line over, this is now greatly reducing the hem circumference. It's basically taking it from this length to this length. And if I'm doing that, I know that the other piece of the hem is over here, so I can also just add to the hem length on that side. And that is this green line here. So basically, I'm shifting away volume on the bottom, and I'm adding volume on this top piece. That may not make complete sense, but as we're going, hopefully it will continue to make sense. And it's all about shifting volume at the end of the day. And you'll note that once I've made these adjustments, I do have a smaller smaller rise cut out as I wanted. It's still a bit pointed, so I don't know if I completely love that, but it's gotten a little bit smaller, which is great. It has also increased the back rise cutout shape. So before, this was the cutout that was on the back piece. and now you can see it's a little bit bigger, and I'm okay with that. The other thing you'll note is because I shifted that volume, now the negative space, before there was a really big pink piece and a small pink piece of negative space, now with that shift, these are more symmetrical. These are about the same amount of volume, just split into like two more even parts. And apologies, I have a cold, so I keep coughing a little bit. I like having equal bits to play around with, especially on a pattern that uses a lot of symmetry, like tights, because there's a left and right, they're very even. So if you have symmetric pieces, it's usually easier to find use for them. So now my query of being able to fit these cut off pieces back into this negative space, I can see that this could fit together really well if these pieces connected. And so my thought process was, what if I break my rectangle? So what if I took these two bottom pieces and shifted it over so that the negative space was one long pattern piece? And now it's not completely symmetrical in this instance, but I think that I could just replace this as the full gusset piece that would go from one inseam up into the front and back rise and back down to the other inseam from the left to right leg. And I think that that would actually eliminate some sew lines. I think that would eliminate some labor from like cut and sew perspective. But then it creates a few problems if I decide to do that. So you can see this rectangle that we've been trying to stay within has now been broken, and we have more negative space, which are these extra pink pieces. So remember, I still have a waistband that I have not fit back into this pattern yet. So what if I use that space for waistbands? One thing to note is that this waistband is too narrow for this space. So one question would be, could I either widen the waistband, which would change the aesthetics of the garment, or could I make it a double layer waistband? Can I use all of this space to make the waistband? And I think that I'm okay with that. I'm going to double up the waistband and make it a double thickness with a fold over. That is what I decided to do here. And you can see that now this pink piece has become the gusset, just one gusset piece. And again, it's not perfectly symmetrical, but we're just going to pursue this line of thinking for right now. So I took this and tried to like finish it up a little bit. I noted that the waistband piece was too long. There was too much of this negative space to be filled up with the waistband pattern piece. So I had this little rectangle left over. And as with any zero waste design, you think about what can I do with the negative space. And with a lot of tights, there are things like hidden stash pockets, there are phone pockets, and oftentimes any negative space can become a pocket. Not always, but it's a good use of fabric if it makes sense for the garment. So I ended up deciding to just do a little rectangular phone or key stash pocket here on the side of the pant. So that is what this little red line is on here. And you can see that this gusset ended up fitting great. The one thing to note is that because this is a symmetrical pattern, this is only making one leg of a garment right now. So we're going to have two of these gusset pieces. We're going to have two of all of these pattern pieces. So it would end up making a doubled up gusset, which isn't unusual. It's just something to, again, think about. If you're thinking in 3D, you're only working on one pattern piece, you have to always remember, oh, there's going to be another one. So like, for example, there's going to be two of these waistband pockets pieces made. So maybe I do one on each side, or I could make it a self-faced pocket that is just free floating from the waistband. And again, this waistband, I initially had thought that maybe it would be a double fold over. I actually might end up making it just a wider waistband because there's going to be two of them, if that makes sense. So now, going back, you can see that these cross lines that we put on at the very beginning are still on here. And a lot of times the thought with zero waste design is there has to be a ton of seams. And the reality is that there don't need to be, but that is sometimes just what happens through the design process. So if you've come to a design you love and you're like, okay, well now I want to try to eliminate some of these seams, the great thing is that we have created a repeat pattern through this process. So what happens if you repeat this in different ways? So in this instance, I just put two right next to each other. I mirrored them and just kind of shifted the volume. And now you can see that this is one large upper tight panel. And then the bottom of the tight panel is broken into two parts still. So this removes this seam here. It would keep this X seam and the bottom half of the Y seam, but that removes one. And then in this version, I repeated it a slightly different way, and I took away the X seam. So it would, or sorry, the Y, the X seam. So in this version, there would be none of these horizontal seams, and it would just have one out seam and one in seam. You can see if I do that, it does again break the rectangle. So you would need to think about how this would rotate around and in a garment or in a fabric layout as you're going. Now, one thing that I haven't said yet, which definitely needs to be considered, is what your width of fabric is. In this exercise, I just pretended like the fabric did not matter at all, which of course it does. With zero waste, you need to always think about your fabric kind of first. But I wanted to just get you out of your heads and think a little bit differently, so we just kind of skipped that part. But most of the time, the way that I work is to put two medium sizes next to each other in a fabric layout. So like if you took this piece right here and rotated it around 180 degrees, had two next to each other, this would nest together very well within itself on a wider piece of fabric. So it's something to consider once you get to this point where you're making these kind of finalized design decisions. So yeah, good to think about. And now we're at the stage where we get to do some comparison. So I took this standard pattern piece, the standard pattern pieces for this tight, I ran it through Clo3D's nesting software, and you can see that the original tight, I ended up doing 4 repeats of this in a 60-inch wide fabric, and it has a consumption of 96.44%, so that is 13.6% waste. So it's always good to do this comparison. It's even good to start out with this knowledge at the very beginning, running it through a simulator like this. And then I can look at the comparison with our zero waste tight, which again has zero waste. This is also a repeat of, actually I think this is 8 pattern pieces repeated in this. I didn't do a set fabric width because we didn't have a set fabric width, but I just wanted to show the comparison between a 13.6% waste garment and a zero waste garment. And really, the only aesthetic difference is, well, on this, I ended up using the original pattern. So we have this X added in, we have a slightly shifted forward inseam, and we have a longer gusset. But outside of that, the fit is exactly the same. We've used the same amount of volume. And when you look at it, the 100-foot look is going to look the same unless you decide to highlight this. Like if you decided to make this garment in a color blocked colorway, you could really amplify and highlight these design details and really kind of show your consumer, your customer, what you did with the patterning. So you can either highlight it or you can hide it, depending on if you're trying to showcase it or not. So yeah, at this point, I would use some final considerations. Again, we just looked at consumption and kind of talked about some of the fit changes. The biggest thing on this would be labor charges and complexity in sewing. Doing an X like this can be challenging to some factories, and adding in the cost of labor for 2 extra long seams would definitely affect the price. So the question then becomes, would adding in the price of those 2 seams be outweighed by the savings of that 13.6% fabric waste? So you get to do some fun cost analysis exercises at this stage. And then of course you would go back and forth with, did this enhance your design? Did it change it? If you wear it, does it feel different? Can you feel those seams anywhere? What do you like? What do you don't like? And you can go ahead and revise it from there. So that is our very brief intro on thinking like a zero waste designer. we looked at one pattern piece for a very simple tight, but think about how you can apply this thinking to literally anything you do. You can do this with just a sleeve panel piece. You can do this with a giant voluminous dress. You can do it with literally anything. You can do it with like furniture design. It doesn't have to just be fashion. And if you start thinking in this way of, okay, how do these shapes kind of fit into each other with this positive and negative space, it'll really change the way that you think about designing, about the way that you lay things out in your design language. It is such a great design challenge. And though it can seem like it's limiting, those limitations end up making you think so outside of the proverbial box. And it's such a rewarding experience. So with that, I will let you continue this exercise on your own. Please have fun with it, and good luck.